আজি আমি আহিছোঁ Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor has always been at the top of my bucket list. Millions of people from all over the world come to this majestic setting to see for themselves where World War II began for the United States of America on December the 7th, 1941. The USS Arizona Memorial is built over the remains of the sunken battleship USS Arizona, the final resting place for many of the 1,177 crewmen that lost their lives when the ship was bombed by the Japanese naval forces. The worst naval disaster in American history turned out to be a pivotal moment in World War II. Pearl Harbor is a US naval base near Honolulu, Hawaii, that was the scene of a devastating surprise attack by the Japanese forces on December 7th, 1941. Just before 8 a.m. on that Sunday morning, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes descended on the base, where they managed to destroy or damage nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 battleships and over 300 airplanes. Sadly, more than 2,400 Americans died in the attack, including civilians, and another 1,000 people were wounded. The day after the assault, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan.
The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise, but Japan and the United States had been edging towards war for decades. The United States was particularly unhappy with Japan's increasingly belligerent attitude towards China. The Japanese government believed that the only way to solve its economic and demographic problems was to expand into its neighbor's territory and take over its import market. With this goal, Japan declared war on China in 1937. American officials responded to this aggression with a battery of economic sanctions and trade embargoes. They reasoned that without access to money and goods, and especially essential supplies like oil, Japan would have to rein its expansionism. Instead, the sanctions made the Japanese even more determined to stand their ground.
Pearl Harbor is located near the center of the Pacific Ocean, roughly 2,000 miles from the US mainland and about 4,000 miles from Japan. No one believed at that point in time that the Japanese would start a war with an attack on the distant islands of Hawaii. American intelligence officials were confident that any Japanese attack would take place in one of the relatively nearby European colonies in the South Pacific, the Dutch East Indies, Singapore, or Indochina. Because American military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, the naval facilities at Pearl Harbor were relatively undefended. Almost the entire Pacific Fleet was moored around Ford Island in the harbor, and hundreds of airplanes were squeezed onto adjacent airfields.
To the Japanese, Pearl Harbor was an irresistibly easy target. The Japanese plan was simple: destroy the Pacific Fleet. That way, the Americans wouldn't be able to fight back as Japan's armed forces spread across the South Pacific. On December 7, after months of planning and practice, the Japanese finally launched their attack. At about 8 am, Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor. Bombs and bullets rained onto the vessels moored below. At 8:10, a 18-pound bomb smashed through the deck of the battleship USS Arizona and landed in her forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded immediately and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. Torpedoes pierced the shell of the battleship USS Oklahoma. With 400 sailors aboard, the Oklahoma lost her balance, rolled onto her side, and slipped underwater. Less than 2 hours later, the surprise attack was over, and every battleship in Pearl Harbor, USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, California, West Virginia, Utah, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and USS Nevada, had sustained significant damage. After the attack, all but USS Arizona and USS Utah were eventually salvaged and repaired.
The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor crippled or destroyed nearly 20 American ships and more than 300 airplanes. But the Japanese had failed to cripple the Pacific Fleet. By the 1940s, battleships were no longer the most important naval vessel. Aircraft carriers were, and as it happened, all of Pacific Fleet's carriers were away from the base on December 7th. Some had returned to the mainland and others were delivering planes to troops on Midway and Wake Islands. Moreover, the Pearl Harbor assault had left the base's most vital onshore facilities, such as oil storage depots, repair shops, shipyards, and submarine docks, intact. As a result, the US Navy was able to rebound relatively quickly from the attack. After the Pearl Harbor attack, and for the first time during years of discussion and debate, the American people were united in their determination to go to war. On December 8, Congress approved President Roosevelt's declaration of war on Japan. More than 2 years after the start of World War II, the United States had finally entered the conflict. The Japanese had wanted to push the United States into an agreement to lift the economic sanctions against them. Instead, they had pushed their adversary into a global conflict that ultimately resulted in Japan's first occupation by a foreign power. We hope you liked our video. Do let us know your thoughts in the comment section. If you liked our video, please smash the like button. And if you loved our video, please consider subscribing to our channel and share this video. Until next time, keep exploring and keep growing.